Good evening, guys. Welcome back to Ansarkari, and I hope that you must be doing great. So let's start our today's discussion for 21st of December, and the first article is talking about crowd management at the airports. So recently, we know that we saw huge surge in, we can say, the people at airports. However, we do not have sufficient amount of infrastructure, or we can say modern infrastructure, to deal with such a huge crowd, which led to delayed flights, and obviously people had to suffer. So the first question that should come to your mind is that what steps would have been taken by you if you would have been at that position, in that position. So firstly, this article is saying that obviously we need modern infrastructure, we need to deploy modern technology, and also there is one more step that has been taken by the government, is that installation, or we are coming up with the faceless check-in system. So that is also, we can say, in the context of installation of modern infrastructure. Then we see that new scanners for like the x-ray machines for scanning the cabin bags have been installed, which has led to, we can say, a short-term relief. And we see that obviously the system, it has failed when it comes to growing the infrastructure to cater to the growing number of flights and the passengers turning up at the airports. So we can say that we need to have a data driven approach to deal with crowd management with such a huge crowd, specifically at the airports, and accordingly take these steps so that we do not have such mismanagement in future, and also people don't have to suffer. Now, talking about the COVID-19 surge in the economies of China, US, and South Korea, we are also coming up with genome sequencing. So that is, we can say, one of the precautionary measures. And yes, obviously at right time, because we need to contain the spread of COVID-19 cases in future, as it is happening in the other economies right now. And we, all of us, also needs to take precautionary measures as required. So that is one development regarding COVID-19 cases. Then coming to the editorial section, this article is talking about giving the Election Commission of India more independence, talking about its more autonomy so that it is able to function in a more transparent manner. And we have already, like we have talked about this topic in detail before also, about the new, what should be the new process of appointment of the election commissioners, and obviously of the chief election commissioner also. And so right now we see that there is complete executive control over the appointments to the election. So the questions that we can say that that is there in front of us is that, is complete executive control over the appointments to the Election Commission of India, is it constitutional? Is it going to be constitutional or not, is to be seen. And if it is not, then what manner of appointments is sufficient to preserve the independence of the Election Commission of India and the fairness of elections? So that is the question in front of us, and Supreme Court has reserved its judgment on this. Then, talking about what is our classical understanding behind the modern democracy. So there are three wings of the state that includes the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. So the task of the constitution is to allocate the powers between these three wings and to ensure that there is an adequate degree of checks and balances between them. So here we're talking about the classical understanding of the modern democracy, and traditionally bodies that are involved with the administrative and implementational issues. Specifically, like here we are talking about the elections. So elections being among them, they are believed to fall within the executive domain. So the things we can say which needs to be implemented and executed the ground level falls within the executive wing. So we can say the task of execution lies with the executive, that is, we can say, the government at the center and the states. Now we see the erosion of this classical understanding that we had, this traditional understanding, and in contemporary times we see that this understanding is no longer dominant, and we see that right now we have, or we can say there's a need of a healthy for a healthy functioning of the constitutional democracies. We need a fourth pillar, that is, we are saying that is going to be the integrity institutions. So the three pillars we can say that we have already talked about, it includes the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And here we are talking about a new reform or a new step that we need to come up with, which is called the fourth branch of institutions, that is going to be the integrity institutions. And we already have them, we can say they are functioning, but we need to take more, we can say more dedicated approach towards that. And we also see that many of the basic rights and guarantees that we enjoy, they cannot be effective without an infrastructure of implementation. Obviously, things being done, being implemented, being reformed just on papers is not going to, we can say, actually modify things on the ground. So we need to ensure their effective implementation, and for that we need, we can say, a transparent and independent and a robust infrastructure of institutions that we are addressing over here as integrity institutions. So I hope the idea behind this is clear to all of you and you have understood also. Then moving ahead, that the fourth branch of institutions, that is going to be the integrity institutions, they need to be functionally independent from the political executive. So there must not be any political interference when it comes to their functioning. And this is obviously because they are the vehicles for implementing the rights against the executive. So that's why their independence becomes very important. And we can take the example of implementing the right to information of the citizens. So obviously, citizens, they will attempt to invoke this right to extract the public documents from the government, and in the interest of transparency. So to be effective, therefore, an information commission, it needs to be thoroughly independent of the government's intervention and its influence. And in recent times, the extensive government control over the Central Information Commission, including the control over the appointments, it has led to it becoming a largely toothless and ineffective body. So, however, just basically the broader idea is about healthy functioning of modern democracies, talking about coming up with the integrity institutions and their independent functioning. And taking what are the examples from the overseas democracies. So here we see that talking about the South African and the Kenyan constitutions, we see that they already have these fourth branch of institutions, which includes the human rights commissions, the election commissions, and so on. And they call them as integrity institutions, requiring them to be completely independent in their functioning and fulfilling their responsibilities and the obligations. So even in the Indian constitution also, we have certain, the fourth pillar of these institutions, the integrity institutions, which includes the Comptroller and Auditor General, the Public Service Commissions, and the National Commission for Scheduled Caste. So you can cite them as examples when we talk about the Indian democracy, but the problem lies in the political interference, and because of which they are not completely independent. And that's why we can say they are not able to deliver on their, we can say, the obligations and the rights towards the citizens. So the other example can be that obviously we are having a debate about the collegium system and its transparency, and government, it wants to come up with the NJC, where the government will also be having the role in appointment of judges. So that raises the questions whether it is going to be like, whether the judiciary's functioning is going to be independent or not, because there would be government interference when it comes to appointing the judges. So that is again one thing. And looking at the vineet narain case also, the Supreme Court, it held that for the rule of law to prevail, the appointment of the CBI director would have to be ratified by a three-member body that will include the Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition, and the Chief Justice of India. So even in this case, the Supreme Court was trying to maintain the, when it comes to the appointment of the CBI director independence in this manner, and basically we do not require any kind of political influence or political interference, or we can say that avoiding complete concentration of power in the political hands, because that is going to impact its independent and its functioning and executions of the responsibilities. So for a sustaining democracy, the appointment process, it needs to involve diverse, we can say the diverse authorities and entities, which includes the government. The opposition must also have a role in, say, the independent experts and judicial experts, in a manner that no one center of power has dominance or any veto power. So that's how the appointment process should be. And the existing system, where the executive has absolute power over the appointments, is unsatisfactory, and it has been historically problematic and damages the rule of law. But the court must be careful to avoid band-aid or stopgap solutions, because this matter was with the Supreme Court and it has reserved the order also. And we can, as a suggestion, we can say that there is one possible alternative in front of the court, that it can place certain interim guidelines for the time being and leave the more permanent and structural solution up to the legislature, because any reform would obviously be we can say it would be requiring an amendment, and that has to be done through the proper process in the parliament. So the court, it can come up with certain interim, we can say short-term guidelines to be followed until we come up with a law on the appointment process, specifically as we were talking about the Election Commission of India. So the appointment process about the election commissioners and the Chief Election Commission. So that is one thing, and I hope you have clearly understood this with the examples that we discussed. And also, the major part was about coming up with the integrity institutions and maintaining their independent functioning without any political interference, ensuring a sustaining and healthy democracy. So that's how it is. And the next article is talking about the Indo-Pacific region. So here we are saying how the dynamics are changing in this region between India and China, and obviously the Southeast Asian countries and their role. What kind of role are they playing, and taking sides either between India or China, or are they, having a balancing act between India and China? So we'll be looking into that in this article. So let's start. So we are seeing that China is trying to widen its outreach when we talk about Indo-Pacific region, when we talk about its growing presence and influence in the Indian Ocean region. So we see that the contestation for South Asia and the Indian Ocean is not new. Obviously, this is not new, but China has long tried to mark its influence in these regions and enhance its strategic ambitions, namely, obviously, to limit India's influence, its military power and status, and to sustain its energy supply and economic growth. So that is one thing, and it began to further its strategic ends. That is, China began to further its strategic ends in the region, in the Indian Ocean, through providing loans to different economies and countries, so as to increase its role, or we can say its presence in the Indian Ocean, directly or indirectly. Basically, it is just trying to increase its presence any which ways. Then it also provides, and it has provided, financial incentives to the countries, and come up with several mega infrastructure projects also. As we know, the Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched in 2013. Then it has been trying to harbor more of its military vessels and submarines in the region, and it has taken certain islands and ports on lease also. As we know, it is following the its policy of pearls, we can say, in the Indian Ocean. Then also it has taken the Hambantota port of Sri Lanka on lease for, as far as I can recall, for 100 years. And obviously we can say that the current economic crisis that is going on in the Sri Lanka, in the Sri Lankan economy, is because of the heavy debt that Sri Lanka owes to China. So there is one another policy that China follows is known as its debt policy, through which it tries to influence the economy of country by, offering it, we can say, loans to the country for its development, for its infrastructural growth. And that's how it, we can say, traps that economy, and it ends up giving huge amount of loans to that country. And in a way, it knows somewhere that the country would not be able to repay it on time, or will absolutely not be able to pay that. So that's how it tries to gain control over that economy or increase its say. So that was, we can say, how it came out to be in Sri Lanka. And talking about the Galwan clashes in the Galwan Valley that happened in 2020. So since then, India is seeing a bigger threat from Beijing, from China, compared to that of Pakistan, because we can say, as we talk about the two front war, that is from Pakistan and from China to India. So we right now we can say that Pakistan's attention, it has been shifted towards Afghanistan since the Taliban took over Afghanistan, because of, obviously, we can say, aggression from that side. So that's why we are saying that we see Beijing as a bigger threat today compared to Pakistan. And talking about what are the steps that India has taken along with its, we can say, its members and it's like friendly neighbors and other participants in the Indo-Pacific region. So we see that India has re-energized its diplomatic efforts in the with the Southeast Asian economies. Then specifically here, like example has been given about each and every economy. So talking about Maldives, it has, like, India, since obviously Maldives, it follows the policy of India first. So even India has provided assistance, grants, and infrastructure projects, and also cooperating on many maritime security projects also, specifically with Maldives. Then with Nepal, we have attempted to improve the Nepal's overall bilateral relations with us. Then Sri Lanka, India is, in this year itself, it has provided economic and humanitarian assistance and investments worth $4 billion to Sri Lanka. Then also, these were the efforts taken by India. So talking about the other South Asian economies participating and taking more efforts towards strengthening their ties with the Indian Ocean economies includes the Quad members, basically, which includes Japan, Australia, United States, and India. So Japan is also finalizing its talks with Sri Lanka on its debt restructuring. Then Maldives, Australia, and US, they have committed to opening their embassies in Maldives. And US has signed a defense and security framework with Maldives. Nepal has also ratified the USA's Millennium Challenge Cooperation. So we can say that Quad members have also been come up, and they are increasing their role in the Indo-Pacific region, apart from obviously India taking certain steps to maintain its, we can say, to maintain its strong presence in the region as the net security provider. And talking about the balancing act that is being played by the South Asian economies when it comes to India and China, as I talked about in the beginning. So we see that the Beijing will continue to leverage its financial and economic might and political influence in this region. And South Asian countries, they've also hesitated to completely move away from China. So they cannot maintain complete distance from China. So in that case, they are trying to have, or they're trying to maintain a balancing act between India and China, and trying to make this competition, we can say, a new normal in the Indo-Pacific region. And such a balancing outcome is very likely with most South Asian countries. They are now facing the economic and political turmoil. So even as we know that the global economy is also slowing down and the impacts that the COVID-19 had. So because of that, we are now seeing the repercussions of that, and economies are definitely facing several challenges. So in that case, they cannot maintain complete distance from China, because somewhere they might be expecting some financial help from China. So that is one thing, and that becomes a challenge for India and its partners, specifically talking about Quad. Then Nepal and Maldives and Bhutan, they are struggling with the depleting forex reserves. Bangladesh has reached a bailout agreement worth $4.5 billion from IMF. So these economies even are, we can say, the littoral countries of Indian Ocean, they are suffering from economic challenges. So that becomes a risk for us. And Sri Lanka is obviously yet to chart its way out of the economic crisis. Then is talking about the general and the global challenges that exist is the energy shortages, the inflation, and the negative of the slow economic growth that is definitely disrupting our day-to-day activities. So these becomes the challenges, and the next year it is going to be the election year for a large part of South Asia. So these economic grievances combined with the political opportunism will likely fuel more instability in the region. So that is the thing that we need to look out at and take timely steps so as to like prevent the more, we can say, prevent the uh, more strengthened, or we can say a higher amount of participation by China in these economies. So that is one thing when we talk about Indo-Pacific region. In talking about the recent draft of the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, so we talk about that it incorporates hefty penalties for non-compliance, and the penalties they even reach up to rupees 250 crores. But there is no link between the turnover of the entity in question. So it is basically not talking about how the penalty would be decided, but it is talking about levying of the penalties when there is failure to meet any of the, we can say, rules and regulations of this bill. And the major concern with this bill is that it seeks to deny providing any personal information on administration officials under the Section 8 of the Right to Information Act, citing the protection of individual privacy of that administrative official. And this leads to conflict between the right to privacy and the right to freedom of speech. So both of these are fundamental rights, and that is the conflict which it leads to. And there is also that it misses out on the recommendations of the Justice Sri Krishna Committee. So that is also, we can say, one of the drawbacks of this bill. And also all the major actors that have been talked about in this bill, which includes the data principles, the data fiduciaries, and the Data Protection Authority of India, that is going to be the regulatory body, it will exercise excessive control. So as I just said, that the Data Protection Authority of India, it will have great independent authority in a regulative area, and the unfettered power of the executive over this regulatory body, it only serves to defeat the autonomy of this institution. And we just talked about this thing in the first editorial, that we were saying that we need to do away with the political interference in such bodies. So again, we see that there is concentration of power in the hands of the center when it comes to appointments. So that is going to raise question on its independent functioning, and there is certain degree of separation between the executive and the regulatory body should be maintained. So that is one thing. And the regulatory body is also going to perform the adjudicatory functions. So the appellate adjudicatory officers, they will be appointed by the board members of the DPAI, who are solely going to be appointed by the executive members. So we can say that such appointments, they could undermine the independence of the authorities functioning, and we need to look into that. And that is, we can say, here in this article we were majorly talking about the drawbacks of this Digital personal data protection bill. We are again seeing that the vegetable prices in India, they are on a roller coaster ride. So they are very, we can say the prices of the vegetables, they are highly volatile and driving the inflation up. We also see a decline in the Naxal violence and deaths in the past 10 years. So that is, you can say, one of the positive news. We have like discussed in detail in yesterday's newspaper about the major initiative or the outcome regarding the global biodiversity framework at, we can say, the Kunming-Montreal Agreement in the form of the Kunming-Montreal Agreement. And this Conference of Parties was held under the Convention on Biological Diversity. So you need to find out more about this convention. Here in this article, we'll be looking into what is the Global Environment Facility and why should GDP be re-evaluated as the chief determinant of development. So what is biodiversity? The basic definition and idea behind biodiversity is that we often address biodiversity as the web of life. So since we talk about food chains, so that's why we are addressing it as web of life. And biodiversity signifies the variety of species on Earth which are all connected and they sustain the balance of ecosystems, enabling humans to coexist. So that is, in short, what do we mean by biodiversity and its importance? And we have talked about the Kunming-Montreal Pact, what are its objectives going to be, what are its targets. So you can go through this portion on your own. And talking about the other initiatives, when we talk about the conservation of the biodiversity, so in the past, we under the Convention of Biological Diversity, we had launched the HE biodiversity targets for 2020. Then we also signed on the Nagoya Protocol, which was specifically talking about ensuring sharing of biodiversity access and benefits. And Global Environment Facility, it is a multilateral body that partners countries and agencies, and it basically provides we can say, more finance when it comes to protection and preservation of environment and the species. Talking about what are the challenges to protecting the biodiversity. So the major challenge to protecting and expanding the biodiversity conservation is the use of GDP as the chief determinant of development. So GDP, we know that it is in financial terms and it does not take the component of development into it when we calculate the GDP. So the first challenge itself is that we are using GDP as a determinant of development, and obviously it is based on a faulty application of economics that excludes the depreciation of assets like nature, which is degraded by relentless extraction of the resources. So this component is missing in the GDP calculation, and also it also lacks on having inclusive wealth, which captures not just the financial and produced capital, but also human, social, and the natural capital. So, as we can say, as a suggestion or as a recommendation, we as aspirants, or from the perspective of an administrator, we can say that GDP must have the human, social, and natural capital component when it comes to its calculation, so that it becomes more comprehensive. And we also talk about green GDP also. So that is, we can say, we were talking in the context of growth versus development, and that's how we need to reform the GDP calculation process and the method that we have. So that is, we can say, one of the challenges here, because we take GDP as the measure, as a determinant of development, when it is not even taking the impact on the nature, on the environment that we are having into its account. So that is, we can say, the faulty basis, and we cannot use it as of now. So here we are talking about the pending United Nations reforms. So we know that the process, it is going to be complex because of the P5 nations and the veto power they enjoy, but it does not mean that change cannot happen. If the process is going to be complex, we cannot just sit and wait for things to happen, because that's how obviously things will not going to happen. But it does not mean that change is not possible or it cannot happen if things are difficult. So we see that it might be possible in future that if the UN reforms, they are not conducted, or we do not have any discussion, or we are not moving in that direction towards having those United Nations reforms, then it might be possible that other organizations and institutions, they might come to prominence. For example, we can have G20 replacing United Nations in future. And as I just said, that talking about the process being complex, when we talk about the UN reforms, specifically the UNSC reforms, so the P5 nations, they have the veto power, and it requires that no P5 should veto the matter, so as to ensure that we are fulfilling, or we are able to fulfill the pending UN reforms. And there might be the possibility of minilaterals. So minilateral organizations and forums playing a more active role in the global affairs. So that might be a possibility in future, and this has been, we can say, highlighted in this article. So we see that 3 more sites, they have been added to the tentative list of UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. So these 3 sites are extremely important, and now that they are a part of the tentative list of the UNESCO, they become highly important. So we should be knowing more about these 3 sites. So first, let's see what are the 3 sites that have been nominated. So the first one is the Gujarat's Vadnagar town. Second is the iconic Sun Temple at Modhera. Third is the rock cut sculptures of Unakoti in the state of Tripura. So here it is given some detail about these 3 sites. So the Sun Temple at Modhera, which is dedicated to the sun god, is the earliest of such temples, which set the trends in architectural and the decorative details, representing the Solanki style of, we can say, art and architecture. So it is basically highlighting or showing up the Solanki style of architecture. And the second thing that we said, or the second site, is the Vadnagar in Gujarat. It is a municipality in Mehsana district of Gujarat. So it has a recorded past stretching back to nearly 8th century BC, and it houses historic buildings that are primarily religious and residential in nature. Then the third site is Unakoti, is an ancient holy place associated with Shiva worship and displaying a number of towering low relief images in a unique style, making it a masterpiece of human creative genius. So that's why we can say they have been nominated, but they have not been given the World Heritage Site tag. So that is yet to happen, and let's see whether they are given or not. But for you, you need to find out more about these sites, because they become extremely important for prelims. Then talking about the Indian Navy taking the delivery of submarine Vagir under, we can say, the Project 75. So this is going to be the 5th Scorpène class conventional submarine Vagir, and it is being constructed or manufactured by the Mazagon Dock Shipbuilders Ltd. And there are going to be, like, we are going to have total 6 submarines under this Project 75I. So the 6th is going to be the submarine Vagir, which is we are expecting next year. And technology transfer under this project is going to happen, or it has happened and going to happen for the next submarine from the naval group of France. And talking about the already commissioned submarines, the first one was INS Calvary, then we had INS Khanderi, then INS Karanj, and INS Vela. So you should be knowing about the names of these submarines and the details that we just discussed. So this becomes important for PT again. Then, as we just talked about in the beginning about the rising COVID-19 cases in China, so we see The situation that we had in India during the second COVID wave is exactly what is happening right now in China. So even their crematoriums are packed, and the cases are like surging, they are like rising exponentially. So that is, we are saying that it is causing an alarming situation there, and that's why even India is taking certain precautionary steps right away. Talking about the economy, the business page, so we see that the outlook is darkening globally, specifically about and because of the COVID-19 cases that are rising at such an alarming rate. And we now expect that local factors are going to play an important role in spurring India's economic growth. So we see that there is unease over the energy, there is unease over the food prices, as we just saw that the vegetable prices, they are so volatile that they're driving the inflation up, and the debt cost is also going to bite or have a negative impact when it comes to the consumer spending. So things we can say that we are not in a safe territory when it comes to the economic situation, or specifically even talking about the next year's outlook about the economic performance that we are expecting. We are having, we can say, we are maintaining an eye on the crucial things and the factors and the variables and the manner in which they are performing and showing up. So that is there. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining thank you for joining in Sarkari. I hope you've enjoyed the session. You have learned something new and a lot of things that we discussed today, specifically from the editorials page. And see you tomorrow. Thank you so much.